Hey guys, Craig McCormick here from DestructivePixels.com, and today I want to talk to you about my top 5 app recommendations to help you with your landscape photography. Before I jump in, I want to give a quick explanation as to how this is going to work. First, I'm going to go through the pros of the app and the reason why I'm recommending it, but then in the interest of being straightforward and honest with you guys, I'm going to talk about the cons that I have found with the apps themselves. Now, no app is perfect, but a lot of these apps do cost money, and I don't want to blindly recommend something to you without letting you know in advance about what are the problems that I've had with it before, if there are any in fact. So with that being said, let's jump in. The first app that I want to talk to you about is called the Photographers Ephemeris. This app is packed full of information, almost too much in my opinion. Now of course it has the usual sunrise and set times, as well as when the moon will rise and set, plus what type of moon it is and when it will actually best be seen, but it's got a whole load of other information in there as well, like a geodetic calculator, because I know what that is. So by default, it will tell you where the sun's position will be for when it's rising and setting. And that by itself is a pretty cool feature, but my favorite feature of this app is that there is actually a slider function inside it, which basically will allow you to go, okay, at 2 o'clock the sun will be in this position, and it's a little slide that you just pull, and then it will just show you the sun rising and setting during that day. That feature is so good in my opinion, because I've used that before when I've been out on shoots, and I didn't know where the sun would be, and I've pulled up the app and gone, okay, at sunset it will be at this position. It's really useful, and in my opinion, it's worth the price of this app alone. Amazingly, you can actually predict the future with this app, but only when it comes to the sun and moon positions and when they will rise and set. There is a calculator thing that you can do where you can go, I want to know what the sunrise is or the sunset time or all this information just by going to a little drop down spin menu thing, and you can say I want to know the day, the date, the month, the year, and it will show you all that information. So while it's not as useful as the almanac, it's very useful for if you're actually going to a location and you want to know all this stuff in advance, because I have actually used this in advance when I know I'm going on a trip and I want to know where the sun will be, because say it's 2-3 weeks away, the sun position will actually change during those 2-3 weeks, so it's really cool to have this information all within this nice app. Now, one of the issues that I do have with this app is that it was last updated in September of 2013, and it does use the old iOS style layout structure, and of course it has moved on now with iOS 8, and it does feel old when you're using it, and it definitely does feel a little bit like a step backwards. I really do wish that they would actually update the app. It wouldn't take too much work for the most part. It would really just be design layout stuff, but it does feel old when you're using it, and it's not the worst thing in the world, but it can be a bit of off-put for some people. For an app that's packed full of information, I'm really surprised that it doesn't have any tidal information. Now that stuff is just as predictable as sunrise and sunsets. As long as the Earth doesn't change in its orbit, you will be able to know what the tides are. It's actually at specific locations. It's really easy to predict, especially if you're doing something like sun stuff. It just seems like a really weird omission to me that would definitely be a great benefit if they added it into this app. So this is a really stupid pet peeve of mine, but it is a pet peeve nonetheless, and it's actually the name, the Photographers Ephemeris. I will give you 1,000 of my best dollars if you actually knew what the term ephemeris meant. Now look, I know it means a table or data file giving the calculated positions of a celestial object at regular intervals throughout a period. But seriously you guys, you couldn't have come up with a better name? Now the second app I want to talk to you about is one called ND Timer. I've used apps like this in the past, and they've always been way too complicated for what they need. And the great thing about this app is it's really simple, really nice, clean user interface. There's 2 selector wheels, one for your shutter speed and one for the type of filter. Once you give that information, it will give you your correct shutter speed, and that is all you need. That is great that they do, just really nice and simple. Something that I never really thought about doing until recently, this app actually lets you stack filters on top of one another and give you the correct exposure time. So say you were to get a 10 stop big stopper and then put a little stopper, 6 stopper in front of that, it will actually calculate the times for you. That's a really cool feature that I never really thought about doing, and it's really useful because you can't just add a 10 stop and a 6 stop time together. That's wrong, because you'll actually have, it's a weird math that I won't bother going into, but let's just say that this app definitely takes out a lot of the headache. This is actually a cool feature that I have used before when I've gone into like the 2+ minute of long exposures. Basically what it is, it's a timer that will tell you how long you have left in your exposure. So say you start your timer, say it's a 2-minute exposure, and it'll just do a 2-minute timer. And I've used this before when I've gone on like I've had exposures of 5+ minutes. It's really useful to have because it will just come up on screen once the timer's done, hey, close your shutter. It's a really useful feature to have. It can only be done for shutter speeds, or like shutter speeds longer than 1 second, but it's a useful feature to have, especially if you're going to the really long exposures, which will definitely happen if you are stacking filters like I said before. A good feature to add would be like a pre-warning notification saying like, hey, get ready to close your shutter, rather than just a, hey, close your shutter now kind of thing. It's a small thing, but I've had it before where I've had a 5-minute exposure and it said, hey, close your shutter. And I'd like to just get my exposure dead on right. So if it was just to warn you like 5 seconds before, that would be like a nice thing to add on to this, otherwise pretty good app. Now the only real issue I've ever had with this app is it can be a little bit buggy when it comes to the timer function sometimes. I've had it before where I've done a timer and it actually starts to go into reverse timing, and there's no way to like cancel it or anything like that. The only thing I actually had to do was I had to delete the app and reinstall it. Now I've heard a couple of people mention this before in reviews of the app, so hopefully they'll fix it in future updates, but it is something to consider because it has been a bit buggy for me once or twice before. Now this next app I'm going to talk about is called Sunseeker. Now I use this app for one purpose and one purpose only, so I'm going to tell you about basically what I think is the best single thing about this app. When I get to a location, I always open up the Sunseeker app and I go to the 3D view mode, and basically what that will do is it will show me where the sun is, it will have a nice overlay, and it will show me the movement path using the phone's camera and overlaying the information on top of it. This is genius. I love using this. I use this all the time when I go to locations because it will basically tell me where the sun will be and what its movement path is in the sky during the whole day. And it even has a horizon line marker, so once it gets past that point, the sun has set. This is really useful for if you're actually on location and you want to be really specific on where you position your sun in your shots. This is great, and it's worth buying this app alone just for that feature. Now I don't know if this is the app's fault or my iPhone's fault, maybe it's a mixture of the two, but sometimes I can get some really wrong readings. Now I think this is most likely to do with the phone's inbuilt compass and the way it calibrates it, because oftentimes when I open up the app it asks me to calibrate using the compass, and you know, at least with the iPhone you have to spin the phone around kind of thing, and sometimes it can give me some really wrong readings. But it's easy enough to know if you're getting a wrong reading, because basically it says the sun position is here and then it's over here, it's somewhere else, so it's really easy to know if it's wrong. But the problem is that you often need to close the app, just completely close it, get out of your multitasking, all that kind of stuff, and then open it up and hope that it asks to recalibrate. Now, as I said, I don't know where the problem really lies here, but it can be a bit of a problem sometimes, especially if you're not on Wi-Fi, and if you don't have good phone signal, because it uses basically your phone's GPS signal to figure out where you are and the position and the direction you're facing and all that stuff. It's quite technical, but sometimes you do have issues, but a lot of the time it's pretty fine. The fourth app I want to talk to you about is a very cool app called Star Walk. I spent ages looking for a Sunseeker equivalent of the stars at night, and this app does just that. It uses the camera's live view mode and overlays star information on top of that. Very cool concept, and it looks stupid amazeballs cool, as well as being really, really useful for astrophotographers, obviously. Okay, so only people who have played the Mass Effect games will understand what I'm talking about here, so feel free to zone out for a minute, but it's very easy when you're using the app and you're going through all the different star fields and the music is playing. You do feel like Commander Shepard looking at the galaxy map in the Normandy. It's a very cool feature. I know it's really dumb to love, but I do love it all the same. They've really just encapsulated what it's like to look at stars and stuff like that. They've done a great job of actually, as a visual stimulation, it is a very cool thing to do. As I said, I know it's a dumb thing to love, but I love it all the same. Now, as I said, this app does have an overlay mode where it uses the camera to basically tell you where the stars currently are, but one thing it can't do is show you where the stars will be. Now, I have a real big problem with this because it actually has a function inside it to basically let you scrub through time forwards and backwards in time. But at any point in time, it will know your position and it will basically show you what stars will be when and where. But for some reason, it won't let you do it in the overlay mode. Maybe it's just something they haven't really thought to add, but this would be a great thing to add for photographers, because it's great if you're standing in a ground somewhere and you go, okay, the stars are there, but I want to know where the stars will be, 6 hours from now at 2 o'clock in the morning, so I can frame up my shot, know what I'm going to do, and then I know what stars are in my shot. I've had problems with this before. It's not the end of the world because you can just pull up the app, when you're actually doing your astrophotography, but it would be nice to be able to plan ahead like you can do with Sunseeker and the Photographers Ephemeris and stuff like that. Now, the last app I want to talk to you about is definitely one of my favorites, and it's called TriggerTrap. This app, along with a compatible dongle that you have to buy, can be used to control your camera basically using any iOS or Android device. Now, of course, it can be used as a regular shutter release, but the app itself has got a whole bunch of really cool features which were only really available in high-end rigs up until very recently. Now, this is a very cool thing to have all in an app that is free. Man, technology is really awesome sometimes. As modern smartphones have things like GPS and motion sensors and microphones, the TriggerTrap app can actually use those to its advantage to trigger the camera. Now, one thing in particular that I do want to try in this app is a thing called the distance lapse. Now, basically what that does is it uses the phone's GPS to calculate distance to trigger the camera. Now, you can set it at different distances and stuff like that, like 25 meters, 10 meters, all the rest of it. But that's something I really want to try because that sounds like such a cool idea. You can do some great time lapses to really cool effects. So I definitely want to try that in the future. Now, this is one of the really cool features that I think is often overlooked by people when looking at this app. A lot of the features inside the TriggerTrap app can actually use the phone's inbuilt camera. So say you want to do something like distance lapse, like I talked about before, it can actually use the phone's camera rather than hooking up your DSLR. Now, think about that for a minute. These features used to only be available on really high-end rigs before, and this app is free. That's really commendable in my book, and it's definitely something that I think is really underrated by a lot of people when looking at TriggerTrap. There's something very cool about having all these different photography options right at your fingertips and makes you really curious to try new things. Like, I had never thought to try using a sound trigger before for photography, but now that I've seen it in the app, it's making me think of all sorts of really cool ideas to try and experiment with, and I think it's really good for that kind of thing. This TriggerTrap app actually lets you think about, oh wow, I could actually do this or that. It sparks a lot of imaginations and really gets your creative juices flowing. One awesome thing about this product is it supports an insane amount of different camera manufacturers and a really wide range of camera models. I'm just going to quickly rattle off all the different camera manufacturers that support because I will not be able to remember them all off the top of my head. It's Sony, Canon, Nikon, Olympus, Fujifilm, Panasonic, Samsung, Pentax, Sigma, Leica, Minolta, Hasselblad, Contax, Lytro, and Kodak. That is an insane amount of cameras to support, and within that they support an insane amount of models that they do, so that's really impressive. But because they support all these different camera manufacturers, they need to have specific dongles for each camera manufacturer. Now, that is one of the downfalls of this kind of thing, is that the app is free, but you do need to buy a dongle from them. It is pretty cheap, it's relatively inexpensive. You just go onto their site and there's a little scroll down menu thing that basically says, this is the type of camera you have, and it basically goes through and says, this is the thing you want. And it's pretty inexpensive, and they've just come out with a recent update for mobile, the TriggerTrap Mobile version 3, and it's really inexpensive. I think it's around £25 or like $35 or something like that. It's a pretty sweet deal really, but it's something to consider because you do have to buy a little dongle to then actually attach your camera to your phone. Now, the obvious drawback is that you're going to have to use your phone and it's going to have to be plugged in at all times in order for these features to work. You can't just set it and unplug it, which of course will be a big drain on battery life. Not the end of the world, but it's definitely something to think about if you're going to be plugging your phone in for a long period of time. Say you're doing a really long distance lapse, let's say that, it can be a bit of a drain on your phone's battery, so it's definitely something to think about. So my only really big con with the TriggerTrap app is that some of these features are very advanced, like long exposure HDR time-lapse. I do appreciate the clean design aesthetic they have in this app, but some of these features really do need a better explanation, because it's unlikely that I'm going to be experimenting with some of these different types of modes if you don't give me an explanation as to what it was, because I'm not going to waste my time doing it. So of course, if you are very curious, you're welcome to try it out and use the recommended settings, but you don't know what the results are going to be, and that is a bit of a problem because it just doesn't give you an explanation really as to what it does or what the results are going to be like. Okay, so that is it. Thank you for sticking around to the end of this fairly long video. These are the apps that I recommend because I use them all the time. If you've ever seen any of the other videos here on my channel, you have probably seen me pull them up before in videos, or at least mention them before, because I do get a lot of questions and a lot of emails asking, you know, hey, what was that app that you were using? What apps do you recommend? So I figured I'd do a big video explaining the apps that I use all the time, and I show to my other fellow photographers and friends and stuff like that. But I also wanted to be straight up honest with you guys and show you the cons of these apps, because no app is perfect, as I said before, but some of these cons are a lot easier to live with. Some of the apps just aren't really aimed at photographers specifically, but they're still useful. But hopefully you still enjoyed this video. I've been Craig McCormick. I'll catch you in the next one.